I think we can all agree that when we see someone who is constantly struggling between doing what they feel deep in their heart they know they need to do and the expectations of other people and worrying about how other people are going to react, that they're doing what they feel called to do is an act of authenticity. I don't think there's any question about that. I think because people don't really have a very clear understanding of emotions and how different kinds of emotions work and the different types of emotions, as I call them, they don't really understand that not all things that we call feelings really work that way. And so because of that, there's this sense among a lot of professionals and certainly among the lay public that if you do what you feel like doing, despite what other people say, and you say what's on your mind, let the chips fall where they may, that's being authentic. And I'd like to say that that's crazy. I think we can point out two examples of kinds of people that we see, one at least fairly often, the impulsive kid with ADHD. Another kind of person that we maybe don't see quite as often, but we know something about, is the person with Tourette syndrome. And I think both of those, you can say the same thing. They say what's on their mind. They do things that they kind of feel like doing, despite the fact that socially they may be met with a lot of disapproval doing it. But I think if we think about it for a minute, we wouldn't say that those people were being authentic. We would say that there's something seriously wrong with them. And I think we'd be right. So hi, I'm S.G. Brownlow, and I want to talk about what I think authenticity really means and why I think so many people get it mistaken. And to talk about that, I want to talk about somebody who would probably tell you that they're just being real and genuine. But I think that most of us looking in on would say we're not being well behaved, certainly, and we're probably expressing a personality disorder. And that's a person, and we've all probably encountered this person who is at a retail store and something's happened. They didn't read the policy, or they didn't follow the instructions, or they made a mistake somehow, or maybe the sales clerk made a mistake, or the store policy they don't like, or something to do with the way the item was manufactured. But however it came about, they didn't get what they wanted, and they're in the process of berating the store clerk. And if you ask them, they're just going to tell you, this is how I feel. I'm just telling him how I feel. I'm being genuine. And you listen to them for a while, and somewhere in there you hear some variation of, people are always trying to push me around. I'm not going to be pushed around anymore. And I want to point out that the key words in that, whether they're said or not, are anymore. Because what that tells us is that we're dealing with not a feeling, but an identity story. We're dealing with an old emotion that has arisen again in a very defensive way to defend an identity story. And if we get into that identity story, and now they may say, okay, I'm just being real, but I think we would, if we think about it, agree that that story was conditioned, it's defensive, it's something that they've kind of made up. It's not really their essence, it's their current story about their essence. And as we get down into that story, if we, like me, go into depth with people and we get into stories like this, then eventually we get to one specific incident that was traumatic or at least heavily filled with shame for them. And what we discover is that this story has a beginning. And so a lot of times we say, that's authentic. And I would argue, no, it really isn't, because it's still that identity story. It's still their ego. We can get through that story. If we focus on the pain, we can get through the story. And what we discover is that the story is defensive and it's holding the pain in place. And as we remove the pain, we remove the story, there's a deeper pain. In fact, there's a deeper series of pains beneath what I would call shame or trauma. And somewhere in there, it goes something like, my parents didn't treat me right, my parents didn't see me, my parents didn't accept me the way I am, my parents didn't really love me, nobody really loved me, nobody will ever really love me, that's because I'm unlovable, there's something wrong with me, I'm defective, I'm a horrible person, I should never have been born, I was a mistake, something like that. And this is all as you're sliding further and further down the levels of despair until you finally get to whatever the lowest level is, whatever you want to call that. And there's a story holding that pain in place. But as you explore that pain in that story, which again is defensive and again is conditioned, because you can remove that and discover that that real pain, their deepest pain, is not there because of what other people did. That they were, in fact, born wanting to love and be loved, and at some point they decided that since they weren't being loved in a way that they could recognize, that they were going to withhold their love for the people that weren't loving them. And that's the most deep, pernicious, serious pain, but it's beneath a whole lot of layers of defense with a lot of stories. So we get to that and we think, that's authentic, right? And I would argue, no, that pain isn't their authenticity either. That pain is the spot of where they broke from their authenticity. That's where they quit being authentic, where they started being conditional because they decided, based on what they'd seen around them, that that's the way the world worked and that's the only way they could survive. And so you have to help break them through their conditional behavior, their conditional attitude and love toward others, to get to what they were born with, what I would call their authenticity, their desire, their deep desire to love and be loved, to relate at a very deep level with other people, and to do it without fear and without boundaries, without reservation. In psychology, there's an ongoing debate. There has always been a debate about the essential nature of people. There are people like Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow that believe that people at their core are essentially good, loving people. And then there are people like Sigmund Freud and Melanie Klein who believe that at their core people are essentially destructive. And then there are people like Erik Erikson who believe that life is really about the conflict between those two, between being loving and being destructive, and that how those play out within the person shapes the person. And all of those have a point. All of those help us to understand certain phenomena. But what I've found in my workings with people is that consistently you can get past the destructiveness, you can get past the defensiveness. And as you get further and further into who people really are at their most genuine and authentic level, you're really looking at their desire to love and be loved without reservation. That's what I would call their authentic self. Anything else is just a sham. If this speaks to you and you have a desire to reach your authentic self and help other people reach their authentic selves, then contact me. I believe I can help you. This is what I do for a living, but more than that, it's my calling. Let me help you embody your authentic, true, genuine self and experience the joy and love that brings to your life.